Milton Friedman gave us Reaganomics, also known as neoliberalism, the economic philosophy that says we should make the rich even richer, and bequeathed to us the unequal political and economic system that we live with today. When we left off yesterday, we were discussing the bipartisan perception that free markets were a force for democracy in the 1990s. Markets aren't actually democratic, because market participation requires money. Since democracy by definition requires participation by the many, and the market only allows participation by the few who have money, the market is not democratic. It is plutocratic. Democracy also implies equality, that everyone has an equal say in reaching a consensus. Any system that gives preference to those with the most money is inherently undemocratic. These distinctions go all the way back to ancient times. Plato and Aristotle observed that the majority in ancient Athens, the demos, were not rich. Since democracy is ruled by the many and the majority were poor, democracy is definitionally ruled by the poor. We, the non-rich, will always outnumber the wealthy few. This is the nature of democracy. This is not at all what Friedman or his followers want. The truth is that any appeals Milton Friedman or his forebears made to the democratic nature of markets was vastly overblown. To them, democracy smacked of collectivism. The fact that majority rule could thwart the ability of a business to maximize profits was seen as a bad thing. When Freddie Hayek visited Pinochet's Chile, he told an interviewer, "My personal preference leans towards a liberal dictatorship rather than toward a democratic government devoid of liberalism." Friedman was equally freaked out by democracy, telling an audience in 1986 that you can't say that majority voting is a basic right. That's a proposition I object to very strenuously. He also wrote, "I believe a free economy is a necessary condition for a democratic society, but I also believe that a democratic society, once established, destroys a free economy." Perhaps Friedman's most infamous prescription for change was the shock therapy he recommended to Pinochet. In her book Shock Doctrine, Naomi Klein goes into great detail about what Friedman had in mind. Referenced earlier was Friedman's quote that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. The reason that Friedman wanted to cultivate ideas and wait for a crisis was that he knew his version of fundamentalist capitalism was too unpopular to win over the public on its merits. The truth is that most people don't like it when the government slashes taxes on the rich, or strips safety measures or environmental protections in the name of deregulation. Auctioning off important pieces of infrastructure like airports or toll roads or street parking in privatization schemes ends up costing the public more when for-profit players move in and jack up prices. Selling publicly owned property and introducing a profit motive also removes any democratic control. As Naomi Klein describes, Friedman believed that shock therapy was necessary to impose rapid and irreversible change before the crisis-racked society slipped back into the tyranny of the status quo. Klein gives her own name to Friedman's shock therapy: disaster capitalism. This was an intentional strategy to wait for a crisis of some kind. Hurricane Katrina is one example. Then sweep in and sell off public assets while people are still coping with the disaster, moving to make the reforms permanent before anyone notices, as New Orleans did with its public school system, swiftly privatizing it in the immediate aftermath of the most destructive storm the region has ever seen. Whatever you call it, shock therapy or disaster capitalism is fundamentally undemocratic. The strategy of rushing unpopular changes into law before the public has time to react is a direct subversion of democratic rule. The premise that economic freedom brings political freedom is faulty. Political freedom is necessary for democratic rule, but supporters of economic freedom fear and resent democratic rule. What Friedman and others wanted wasn't greater political freedom for the many. No, what they actually wanted was greater political freedom for those with the most economic freedom, the rich. Greater economic freedom only provides greater political freedom if excess profits are used to influence the political process. The secret agenda at play here was to provide a system for the rich that kept them free from democratic control. Say what you like about big government, but at the end of the day, government in the United States at least has some small measure of democratic controls. If the government goes too far, it is possible to rein it in through lawsuits or elections or public pressure. Private power, on the other hand, is completely unaccountable. If you don't like what Ford Motor Company is doing, good luck getting them to change their policies. The public has no control. Shareholders may have some small measure of control, but as described before, the fewer shares you hold, the less influence you wield. You must be rich to exert any influence over private power. But even then, there's no guarantee. A privately held corporation like Koch Industries doesn't even have shareholders, so shareholder democracy cannot influence the whims of the rich family who run that corporation. Milton Friedman always claimed that economic freedom was a requirement for political freedom. But that was a lie. Economic freedom isn't about political liberation for all. It's about liberating capital, unshackling the rich, and allowing them to do whatever they want. We'll discuss that more in my next post. Until then, please like, follow, favorite, and sign up for my free Substack. Let's make them pay.